What kind of a world do we want to live in? This podcast opens the difficult and uncomfortable conversations about crime, addiction, poverty, and more. If we want a healthier community, these messy conversations need to happen. This is Dangerous Ideas for Social Change. All right, I just want to say welcome to Dangerous Ideas for Social Change. I'm very excited about today's interview. We're going to be sitting here with longtime friend Sel Burrows and having a discussion about something that's near and dear to both of our hearts. The title, Dangerous Ideas for Social Change, is a little tongue-in-cheek. Like, not too many ideas are that dangerous, but it seems like now we're walking with everybody walks on eggshells, and we just want to have more courageous conversations. And if ever there was somebody that I know willing to have courageous conversations, it's you, Sel.
Well, it's interesting because I was just re-looking at a book called How to Tax a Billionaire when we took on the Bronfman family when they moved $3.2 billion out of Canada. And we lost at the last moment, but a whole bunch of laws were changed so nobody could ever move their money like that again. And in the book, the writer said, Sel Burrows is a very dangerous man. So I think that's a wonderful epitaph for myself.
Trigger warning, folks. We're sitting with a very dangerous man, because what could be more dangerous than someone with courage and someone who actually holds the truth, knows some things?
Well, you know, what's interesting is the Indigenous community has traditionally valued the concept of the elder, the older person. And until I got old myself, I didn't really understand that. And now I look at myself and I have a whole bunch of experiences that have allowed me to be more skillful, but I lack the modernity. You know, the kids can work away on their computers and their stuff. So to balance the wisdom that comes from many years of activity and trying to make social change and get together with someone who can tape a podcast, which I couldn't do.
Well, honestly, I'm quite dependent on my staff for that too. But I have a saying. There's the wisdom of the elders, and then there's the well-practiced fool. Mm-hmm. So sometimes people don't gather the wisdom from life and actually produce something wonderful. Yeah. You have done that, Sel.
Well, you know, I met a worker priest when I was volunteering down in Guatemala, and he talked about the concept of the edge person, that if you want to be effective, if you opt out of society, your ability to be effective is really minimalized. But if you opt totally into society, the power structure, it'll co-opt you. And I've always tried to be an edge person, keeping one foot in the real world and one foot outside so that I can still have the flexibility to comment. And, I look back in my life and I feel pretty comfortable with what I've tried to accomplish and many of the things that are still going that I started many, many years ago. So it's a good feeling.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of touches a little on our relationship because my hope for the way I approach problems and challenges and in our community is that I kind of have that ability to get up in a helicopter and take a look at things, like philosophically, of course, not literally, and say, like, okay, what are we missing here? And there too, that's kind of like you have to step away from the situation to be able to see it clearly.
Yes. You know, the issue of absenteeism, you know, my late wife and I moved back to North Point Douglas in 2006. And one of the things we noticed right away was all these kids hanging around during school time, you know, and it wasn't acceptable, but it was acceptable. That's the problem. In the larger society, people would panic and do something if a kid wasn't going to school. We discovered in the inner city that it was just allowed to happen, and it was the beginning of a drift towards a massive problem that we'll talk about some numbers later.
It's so interesting, Sel, because my story is very similar to yours, and that's how we kind of came together on this issue, which has just been wonderful. But I guess in honesty, you and I had really no business to do something about or notice this, because like that's what I found surprising is that that how are we calling this out?
Exactly. This is mind-boggling. I mean, when the Conservatives had that big thing, Bill 64, I was on education. Everybody's worried about governance, how many school trustees, da-da-da. From my feedback I got, I made a major presentation on absenteeism, as did one other organization, but 500 presentations. We've got 20,000 to 40,000 kids not getting an education, and nobody else mentioned it.
Yeah, it's if you get conspiratorial about it, you wonder whether there's some bigger thing at play here. But nevertheless, there we were. I noticed in the community, our staff would talk about it. How often you'd see kids walking around the neighborhood in the middle of the day, and so then we had, and we've already covered this. It's somewhat in the media, but and somewhat public about the issue. You discovered the disparity between St. John's and Calvin.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, I was having a real difficult time getting anybody to pay attention to the issue of school absenteeism. So because I've worked in the bureaucracy, I have fairly good understanding. I phoned Winnipeg 1, got the superintendent's office, and it was a clerk, and I said, look, I'm just looking into absenteeism. Could you tell me how many kids were absent on May 16th at Calvin High School and how many were absent at St. John's High School? Oh, just a minute. And she was away for a minute, and she came back and said, well, there were 34 kids absent at Calvin, and I'm blocking on the exact number. I think it was 160 kids absent at St. John's, and their schools were the same population. That gave me the leverage to continue the conversation, and people couldn't tune me out the same way because I had hard numbers. So to that clerk, thank you so much. You have contributed a huge amount because the system has had difficulty allowing people to know what the real numbers are.
Not to jump ahead in the story too much, but to that point, I remember the one thing when we sat on that provincial task force, I would often bring up the topic of attendance audits. Mm-hmm. And if you ever want to see bureaucrats' eyes go big as saucers, that's the comment to make, because we were basically calling for, going in and actually checking each classroom to check the data, because even at that point, I believe we had it was a 4% absenteeism rate at Calvin and a 16% absenteeism rate at St. John's. Yeah. But you and I suspected that it might even be worse than that, and that's why I felt it was important. Like, let's really figure out why, exactly how bad this problem is.
Yes, and we're still having trouble getting to the depth of that. Both of us, I think, have contacts in inner city schools and northern schools, and the feedback we're getting is that it's an extremely serious problem. We haven't had even up-to-date statistics for a long time, but one teacher recently told me, what am I supposed to do? I've got 24 kids enrolled in my class and only 5 came yesterday.
Yeah, it's crazy numbers.
Yeah. That's extreme.
Sure, but I believe it's more common than we think. I had a call a couple of weeks ago with a local teacher who said that the data in the one school was, again, over 70% absent at this time of year. And so it seems like we've done all kinds of work, and we still have a pretty big, a significant problem.
Oh, it's getting worse rather than better. Kent, if we were being assessed ourselves on the effectiveness of our work, we'd fail. We haven't been able to budge the system. We're still pushing it. The system is listening to us, but there's a huge barrier to getting any effective change made. And, I'm very blunt on this. The problem is, for people working in the system, they think they need to make the schools better. And of course, there's things we could do to make the schools better. But the reason that most children are not attending school regularly, chronically absent, more than 10% absenteeism, is the problem in the home. And when you have a home that's so disrupted itself, where the parent is unable or uninterested in getting the child off to school first thing in the morning. A kid in grade 1 isn't making their own decision as to whether to go to school in the morning.
Yeah, I think there's sort of a symbiotic kind of relationship that needs to happen between schools and those homes that are that are struggling, and how do we kind of activate both sides so that we can kind of bring this together. The one thing I wanted to talk about, so we made yourself and myself and I believe Kyle Mason made a presentation at Winnipeg 1 School Division when this all came to light.
Yeah.
And we brought forward just the simple fact that this is an urgent matter. I thought on a certain level, ironic that people outside of the education system were coming in to talk about how important education is. But we made our presentation, and in early May, and then in the subsequent trustee meeting, one of the trustees talked about our we can read in the minutes that essentially we didn't know what we were talking about is the implication,
Yeah.
and he called it troublesome and problematic that we had brought this to light. Sel, how have we been doing troublesome and problematic things? Like what is
Well, obviously we haven't been troublesome enough and problematic enough because nothing happened. We made that presentation. It was well based on statistics plus human stories. The issue is real. There's this massive number of children who are not getting an education in contravention of the United Nations Rights of the Child Declaration. And we failed. We weren't tough enough.
Now, to me, like that comment, his comment is about kind of the moral high ground. That you and I maybe we misstepped there according to this trustee, and somehow they're saying that keeping this down, and continuing with business as usual, is the moral high ground, and I struggled with that. I'm like, this is garbage.
Of course it is. It's totally unacceptable. But because we didn't know about that comment until recently,
right?
Like what is it, 12 years later or whatever?
Yeah, we just discovered it literally 2 weeks ago.
I got a nice letter from the chair of the board thanking me for being there, making the presentation, and that they would be definitely looking into it. And, I guess have to take some responsibility. I was juggling away too many balls in the air of too many issues, and I could have been tougher. I could have followed up more vociferously.
Don't you feel that, in fairness to you and myself, that it felt like pushing rope? Like, we would try some pretty tenacious, I remember on one occasion talking to one senior leader and saying, we'll send students into your classrooms to get us the numbers if you don't give us the data.
Yeah.
And that seemed to kind of, there would be a little scare,
Yeah.
but then they would step back and we'd be back to business as usual. And in our whole time on that task force, we never actually saw the data. The only time is what that phone call you made, to my recollection.
Well, and this data that we got when we were pushing around the issue at Frontier School Division, and we got hard stats from 2017 showing that grade 1 had a 19% chronic absenteeism rate.
Which was very similar to grade 4, 5, 6, I think grade 4 and 5.
Yeah, right up to grade 11. Right up to grade 11.
So this points to the fact that it's not just in one particular age group that the problem exists. This is
no, if there's so many parts of this to talk about, but my analysis, and I've obviously spent almost 20 years working on this issue. Well, it is 20 years actually. One of the things we realized is that in the early years, say up to grade 5, the child doesn't make the decision about whether they go to school or not. The parent either pushes them out the door or lets them sleep in. After grade 6, all of a sudden you're getting into kids that have some responsibility making choices. But if they haven't attended this wonderful education system we have, they haven't learned. So they're going into grade 6, grade 7, and they can't read. They can't write a paragraph. They can't do it. It's so embarrassing. So all of a sudden you've got a new force encouraging kids not to attend, that they're embarrassed because the system has failed them.
Yeah. I think, we've tried all manner of things. We've worked with, how many ministers of education have you badgered about this issue?
Well, there's a new
7,
one,
8?
eight. Four NDP, 4 Conservatives. And, everybody expressed concern, interest. Some did a little more than others. But in effect, we have no new change in policy. I shouldn't say that. The school nutrition program, which the present government has put in, is a fantastic program, but it hasn't had the impact on absenteeism that the government had hoped for. Our feedback is, and confirming talking to senior government officials, it's been a really major positive for kids who are attending, but not as well as they should have, and it's improved attention and stuff like that, but it hasn't had an impact on the chronically absent, the kids who are absent a lot.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that came to light when the school division under Matt Henderson's leadership came out in the media to talk about the levels of absenteeism in the school is that to the to an individual who maybe doesn't have intimate knowledge of things, at first blush it kind of looked like, yes, we have a problem, but you didn't get a clear sort of sense of exactly where the problem was, because the data was washed throughout the school division. So I believe the percentage that was announced is that roughly 19% of students, if you recall, are struggling with absenteeism. And my challenge in that moment was that it doesn't capture it, because you might have a school in one part of the division that has a 4% rate of absenteeism, and then the whole data is if you just wash it out, then you don't get a sense for where the real problems are.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about schools in our community in the North End here. High levels of absenteeism, and I've wanted to throughout the task force, I kept going back to the line honesty with impunity. So there was something holding everybody back from telling the truth. There was sort of like a fear, or like we can't, nervousness about saying exactly what's happening. And what's your thought on getting specific, like saying, okay, let's just use R.B. Russell as an example. High level of absenteeism. What can we do specifically? Why is it important to understand there's unique problems in that school in your mind?
Well, I want to go beyond R.B. Russell because it is a technical school. We need to look, for example, at regular elementary schools in the inner city, and the absenteeism rates are colossally high. And I just got a call. I get calls from neighbors about a school on your side of Main Street, not on the about 3 kids playing outside the school during school time, elementary, and at lunchtime the kids came out, and these 3 kids convened with some of the kids that had been in school, and they left and didn't come back to school. So the one of the things nobody likes to talk about is the power of the negative. We have a whole cadre of kids, families who don't value going to school, and they are influencing kids who are in the balance. And when I talk about drugs and meth problems, I say the meth addicts have the best support system going, and I'm almost going to segue that. And kids being absent have a fantastically good support system. Other kids to play with, homes that they can go and visit and stay during school hours with no repercussions. We desperately need to change that power structure, and the positive people have to step up, have to be naming situations where kids are not attending and intervening. And we need I call it a very big carrot and a very small stick, but we need a carrot and stick approach to getting the families to get those kids to school.
There's a model that Agassiz used to use. It was called a positive peer culture, and the idea of the model was that if we can shift this from a negative peer culture that you're talking about to one where young people in our communities see the importance and are invitational about their peers who are maybe lagging behind and not attending. So we can place some of the burden on those young people, on families. We want to be sensitive to the dynamics around that. What do we have to say about the role of schools in all of this?
Well, this is a biggie, of course, because the school has to be the focus of the solution. But because much of the problem lies in the home, away from the school, it needs the support of other institutions. One of the things I looked at is we have clear identification that we're running around 20% absenteeism. 40,000 kids that's in the present school system are chronically absent. We have 10,000 kids in care. We don't know exactly the number of kids, what we call protection families, where Child and Family Services has decreed that they have to keep an eye on them to protect the child. Estimate 25,000 kids in that. The other third one is
just on that.
Yeah,
I did the numbers on that recently, and that's a value of over $320 million.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. I'm going to get to that because what I'm trying. The third thing that identifier is families who have at least one member who's in jail or has been in jail recently. Melissa Martin wrote a wonderful article in the Free Press about people who had been involved in crime and how they got out of it. And every one of them, when they talked about their family, had a family member who'd been in jail. So if we took those three different identifiers, we'd probably have all the same kids.
Right.
So we have a budget in the education system to educate these kids, but it's not being used because they're not there. We have a huge budget in Child and Family Services, but one of the things that's happened over time is the dislocation between the social worker and the family, where because the family's afraid that they're going to snatch their kids, apprehend, there's a lack of trust. And the correction system, it is really not a helpful system. I worked in that area for some time. So one of the things we need to do, for example, is to take a look at all those kids that are identified in these three different catchment groups, put them together and take a look at how that money, that hundreds of millions of dollars, is being spent. And maybe take a look at the Finnish model of how they dealt with infant mortality, infant morbidity. They set up a separate system with huge rewards to the families that registered. They got free milk, free vitamins, everything, and they had a health worker visit, not a social worker, not a probation officer, who was only concerned with that issue. And they went from having the worst record of infant mortality, infant morbidity in Northern Europe to having the second best in 10 years. So I'm just throwing out that there are models of intervention in families that can be successful. And we have failed, you and I,
Sure we have.
to get anyone to take a look at other models. We're still looking at the teacher going to the home and getting the kid to come out.
I think, if we track back to the beginning, you and I bringing this to light and the resistance we felt. So there's a kind of takes a village approach that I think is needed. And when we think about the role of child and family and justice, it really needs to be a collaborative kind of approach. We can't place the burden. I don't feel we can place it fully on families.
No.
And say, come on, families,
no,
get your kids to school.
Absolutely not.
And we can't we can't place it on any one body to make it happen, but we do need everybody to come together.
Yeah.
And what we've experienced through Engage Education, our initiative, is that when you try to do that collaborative thing, it can be difficult. Where schools have, it's like a little education factory, and they have a program, and they have a plan, and now you're bringing something that's sort of like an unsettling kind of like a kid who is not tagged onto their timeline, and they may be behind in a number of areas. So our challenge has been, when we bring those kids into that school, that schools haven't been ready to reintegrate. And because my theory, Sel, is that you've talked about the normalization of negative. This has been normalized.
Oh, yes.
The idea that students, that by attrition, they fall off, and we just come to accept that. Yeah, we want to keep that funding, but we don't see ourselves as responsible to develop a healthy reintegration plan. And this is where we feel, from our work in the community here, reaching out to kids who've been out on average 2-3 years, they've been out of school completely, is that schools will have to hit reset on, they'll have to have teachers who are dedicated to reintegration. B, they'll have to have space where a student can come in, and that space is dedicated to kids that are getting onboarding and getting reintegrated. And then 3, they'll have to have a strategy, an actual strategy for what do you do with a student whose life stabilizes to the point that they can re-engage. Now it's January, perhaps.
Yep.
And
Well, interesting enough, one of the things, in talking to teachers, there's all sorts of systems within the system to address exactly what you're talking about. But they've become normalized, like an IEP. What's an IEP? Individual Education Program. Children who are behind in early grades are identified, and an IEP is set up for them, and it carries with them. But I discovered nobody bothers looking at them. Nobody but looks at that IEP. Is it working? Is it being successful? And of course, if the child's not in the school very often. Secondly, reading particularly. Our education system's really committed that kids learn to read. So in the early grades, if a child's diagnosed as not having low reading skills, they're assigned a reading assistance person who is, a graduate teacher getting, well paid. But of course, if they're absent from school, they're absent from their specialized reading program as well. And the indication I'm getting from the teachers this is grade 3, 4, 5, 6, is they aren't getting any better. The kids aren't, even if they've got an IEP and a reading coach. By the time they're in grade 6, they're still not reading.
So, okay, we've got the problem identified. We've got a history. We've got things that have been normalized, like behaviors that have been normalized over the years. And so this is where we are in the story.
Yeah.
And so this is a terrible thought experiment to run, but I think it warrants running it, because we're actually doing it. And I think about the implications of leaving things as they are. So what we would have to do if we just continue on this path is then we have to say, all right, we accept the fact that a certain percentage of our society will be uneducated and will be most likely, caught up in dependency or the implications of that. I know we don't like these thought experiments.
Sorry, I won't accept that.
Well, of course not. But we have to run the experiment because we're doing it in reality. Yeah. We're actually doing that now.
We don't have to run the experiment. We are running the experiment.
Exactly.
Yes.
So what do we do with this?
Yeah.
What do we do? How do we, when we think about sort of theories of problem solving and change, is we thought, back when we shone a light on this, that we had done that sort of, that activating event where we created a sense of urgency and I don't think we should be too hard on ourselves. We've gotten a lot done, but how do we now create a new sense of urgency We have a new government in place. We're going to have, lots of traction with this, really shining a light on this issue.
Yep.
Where to from here, Sel?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's more of the same for us. And, one of the things we've got with this government is they've made a hard commitment to doing something. They believed that the nutrition program would have a major impact. And, it's a good program. Please, I don't want anybody to say I'm not, but it hasn't had the impact on getting more of the chronically absent kids attending school. So I think we have the opportunity now to work with the government and say, okay, you took a good shot. You did more than anybody else up to this point. What do you have to do now? And I think at the last meeting you and I were at with the government officials, they set out, that the schools at least minimally must have a register of the kids who are chronically absent. And that as soon as that child's absent, a bell goes off and a whole bunch of activities have to take place. Secondly, on the kids that disappear, we know that sometimes they disappear into another system. A child is apprehended, is placed in a foster home, and if that child doesn't start going to school in the new school, that child stays on the registry of the school where they were apprehended from, the district. And so
that cume file just sits there collecting dust. No one knows.
That's right. And, we need to mobilize every type of system, and every teacher, every principal and superintendent must be aware of their responsibility. It's not just something they should do. They have to do. The minute a child is identified as chronically absent, there must be plans, there must be actions working towards getting them to attend more regularly. You notice there's a problem with what I just said, because I didn't say what we would do to get these kids. And many of us have different opinions. We probably need to try out a whole bunch of different things, but action has to take place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, think of the Built to Last research talks about try a lot of stuff and keep what works, which is kind of the description of action research. So this is something we've tried to do through our program because, you don't know what's gonna actually work.
When we're looking at 40,000 kids, I've been attacked regularly in meetings by people who say I'm too blunt, and I have some clear ideas of some basic things that need to be done. And I turn around and say, well, how are we going to work with 40,000 kids if you say we need to build a relationship, we need to, work with them to the point where they're ready to come back. I don't want another 20 years to go by and another 20 years worth of kids growing up poor, involved with drugs, involved with crime, because we know the kids who don't go to school are the much more likely to be our criminals of the future. And we have a responsibility. And, you and I have discussed the whole door knocking thing. I mean, I worked on a program in Thompson. This was high school age kids. And it was a work-study program for kids who weren't doing well in school or attending well. And George, if the kid wasn't there by 8:30, he was there pounding on the door and waking everybody in the apartment block up. And after 3 days, everybody in the apartment block was invested in getting Billy to go to work because George was waking them all up. That's oversimplifying. But
no, we really believe in knocking, like through our program, but we talk about the second knock.
Yeah.
And so the first knock obviously has to happen, but we find that it's important to get in behind. Otherwise, the resistance, when we keep trying, then the door just is locked and that's never opening again. Yeah. So the idea of outreach through relational connection, and again, I'm with you on the fact that there's too many kids. Like, how many kids are we going to actually impact by doing this? And but it almost feels like we sort of have to acknowledge the space we're in.
Yes.
So here we are, a problem that's existed for years and years, a problem that no government has successfully solved. A problem that if you have a short four-year cycle mindset,
Mm-hmm.
you probably are just going to get caught up in different sort of political, dynamics. And I think you have to have a long view. So in my mind, I'm like, we have to say, okay, what we have been doing has not been working. The things we have been accepting as normal should not be normalized.
Right.
And so we have to, I think early on when this was exposed, I talked about the strange thing called lament, like where we actually have to say, like, this is incredibly sad. Here's where we are in the story. This is incredibly sad that it's come to this, and just sort of sit with that for a bit. But then, obviously, very quickly act. We have to act. We have to do something, and we, again, I'll go back to my honesty with impunity. I've noticed that you fault yourself for being blunt. I personally think it's a virtue, because I think in what we have is we have a context where everybody's a little nervous. Even for us to get information about what's happening in the schools, everything's done by cover of dark. Like, no one wants to say, my name's Jim, I'd like to tell you what's happening in my school. We can't seem to, it's all like, cloak and dagger, digging, like what's happening. And so I hope for a day when we can just say, okay, we're at a terrible place as a community and as a society.
Yeah.
And then no one should be punished for telling the truth about what's happening in their school. We should welcome that information. And why do you think we can't?
And I don't think anybody would be punished, but they feel they would be, and we need to somehow get across that being open and honest about the problems are good. I talked to the father of a teacher in R.B. Russell in the locker room at the gym I go to, and the father is very clear that only 6 of 14 kids in the welding class are attending. And his son, who's a committed teacher, is really concerned that he isn't able to impart that knowledge. So the father, but the teacher, for some reason or other, is uncomfortable to talk about that issue.
Yes, so I think honesty about where we're at is critical, and I think you and I have done our share of being honest.
One of the other things we haven't talked about is the education system has tried certain things that hasn't been successful. And R.B. Russell, which is a problematic school because it's a technical school. It had $1 million worth of extra programs. I'm blocking on the name of it, Sunshine Program, something along that line. They had
Thunder Wings?
No. Anyway, they had mental health workers, this, that, and the other thing, and they had the worst attendance of any school in Manitoba. Mm-hmm. And so putting programs in the school isn't much help if the kids aren't going to the school. Obviously, we need to have programs that are into the community. And,
this all points back to a collaborative approach.
Yes.
Because, I've thought about schools as building pull factors, things that draw community to them.
Yeah.
But if there's no push factors, like if families aren't saying, aren't encouraged to send their kids, and if the community isn't active, it's going to hit neutral. We won't get any results. So schools building their pull factors, but there still has to be a collaboration with organizations that are creating the push factors. So we're going to have to get outside of those doors of the school. We're going to have to find ways to work with other agencies, even ones who maybe ideologically are in a different place. If we can just say, okay, this is about students getting to school, nothing else. I feel like we're going to have to unsettle that little barrier between that the front door of the school and the community.
And it's problematic because people work within the system truly believe that if they made their system better, the kids would come. And unfortunately, our knowledge now, we know about the absenteeism rates in grade 1, 2, 3, and 4. We know that it's not the child deciding not to come to school. It's a family that is so distressed, so disrupted. Issues of alcoholism, drug addiction, mental health, whatever you want to talk about. So many single moms that have been badly beaten. Those are real issues. But in the meantime, if we don't manage to have a way to get those children into the school, they will not learn, and they will be the next generation of people who are, unfortunately, 670 people died of overdoses.
I think it was around 600.
Around 600. 570, actually. Yeah, I got the right number. 570. Most of those people, not all by any stretch, were kids who didn't attend school regularly. The level of people who don't have sufficient inner strengths to support themselves, we need to be able to give them supports. Society has a huge responsibility, and partly we don't know what to do. There are different theories and different things, and I'm open to many of them, but we need action rather than words.
Yeah, I recall the research piece that came out after Tina Fontaine's passing, this tragic passing. This bright young woman who had the future ahead of her, and the one line was, "We lost her first in school." And so my heart, like when I think about, I want to talk about this actually, like what motivates you to see this as important. For me, when I think about the value of individuals like Atina, and I see so many kids in our community where if you just, we talked about the stats, that's very important, but they're also, when you personalize the stats and see the implications that it has for kids, I've been so encouraged to see some of the success stories that we've had through our program, where kids that are just completely lost from society, like just hidden, like the hidden homeless, like these are kids, uneducated kids in their basement, stuck, just completely locked out. And then to see what happens for those kids when they start to realize that they can learn, it's incredible for me, and that motivates me. I'm a person of faith, and so I think too, like, about this idea of Imago Dei, like made in the image of God. That motivates me when I think about people are vitally important because they matter to God, and they matter. We need each other, and so I'm motivated by seeing somebody who's completely lost in society kind of be found. And Sel, talk about your motivations.
Well, it's a hard one to talk about. Obviously, I'm not a person of faith.
Yeah,
you and I manage. I think one of the values of us working together is we do come from two different perspectives. I just firmly believe that everyone in a democratic society has the right to a decent lifestyle. And that's why we have a social safety net, and Canada has a better one than most. But one of the things we're discovering is that systems over time become functioning to serve the needs of the system so we start missing people. And it was a simple thing, my daddy delivering Christmas hampers, and I was, I guess, 10 or 11, and going into homes. I grew up a nice middle-class kid, going into homes where 5 people were sleeping in one room, and it just wasn't right, and I must admit that, I was very active in the United Church, Westworth United Church, and we had a young people's group that I became chair of, and this professor from the University of Winnipeg became our counselor because no parents could handle us rangy bunch, and he introduced us to international issues and the poverty in Africa and South America. And it grew and grew and grew within me that, hey, I had everything. I had good parents. I had the ability to learn. There's this huge number of people that we're missing. Society's missing, and I felt some responsibility to be part of the solution. And it's just grown on me. And
so it may have sort of still had its roots in faith. It sounds like you described it.
Yeah. There's definitely the social gospel. The Tommy Douglases, J.S. Wordsworth's. Both. One a Baptist minister and one the other Presbyterian, I think. Challenging the inequities of society. Those are my role models. I actually was Tommy Douglas's volunteer driver a couple of times.
Amazing.
Going way, way back. Wonderful human being.
Well, I think, Sel, our relationship and the fact that we've described a disparity in worldview. Like we don't have the same worldview.
No.
And I think the fact that we can work towards the common good, set our differences aside,
absolutely,
should be a bit of a template for schools to do the same.
Absolutely.
And for other agencies. Can we please keep our eyes fixed on the well-being of these kids, set our differences aside, and work with conviction to see kids have wonderful lives? I think this is going to become vital.
Well, I'm just going to take a step even further out.
Go further.
The number of police officers that I know, because I work closely with a lot of police, who are so upset about the kids not going to school because they're arresting these kids. They're seeing them stealing from 7-Eleven. They're seeing them all the time. And so the image the police officer has is this tough guy. These really caring people are saying, what's going on? How come nobody is doing anything about these kids not going to school? And so really we need to mobilize this wider network of caring people. But, there's more people lobbying the deputy minister about how people, whether they should print or write neatly and things like that than whether they go to school. So I think, somehow we need to get more people involved, more people pushing the system, and taking perhaps some of the money right now that's spent supposedly on educating those kids that's misplaced because the kids aren't there, and taking some of that to hire outreach workers, people who are culturally appropriate to the kids that are not attending school, who can get into the homes, work with those mums, enable those mums to get the kids to school. And at the same time, you've raised the issue of the reentry of for kids that haven't gone to school for a long time.
I think the kind of one of the views I take on it is desperate times, desperate measures. So this is a really big problem, and we're going to have to break some of our rules and the tight funding structures and the way, this is how we function. Schools that say, no, these are tight parameters, this is how we function. Community agencies say, no, this is all we do. We're going to have to break that down and think outside of the box so that we can get kids back into school and functioning fully.
Yeah, and it's difficult because everybody who's working in social services and education, they feel they're doing a good job. And at the same time, we're missing 40,000 kids. 40,000 kids are not attending school regularly. They're chronically absent. I have to keep repeating that number. It upsets people. And they say, well, it's not really that number. And I say, okay, is it 35,000? That's a huge number of kids who aren't going to be able to get a job because in today's society, there's very few jobs that you can get without being able to read and write. And if you've been chronically absent, you're not going to be able to read and write sufficiently for your employer.
Well, Sel, one thing about you is you just don't go away. and I think our commitment is steadfast. My commitment, I'm not going to go away on this issue.
No.
And I know that your persistence has been inspirational to so many people.
Yeah. Well, Kent, I have to say right back to you, you have been such a fantastic foundational person on this issue. The knowing you're there. I mean, these task force and these stuff, you and I are the only ones that are still around from the beginning. People have come and gone, showed some attention and left. Wow, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been great working with you, and there'll be more information. We're going to continue to talk about this, despite maybe people wishing we wouldn't. But we're both stubborn and determined, and we have the well-being of kids in mind. And so I want to say thank you, Sel, for your work, and thank you to our listeners. Please continue to tune in. We love your input. If you have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you, and especially ideas around what we can do about this issue. If you're a teacher in the system and you would like to reach out to us, please contact us through icya.ca. You'll find my email there. We'd love to hear from you, and obviously we'll handle all of your input with confidentiality. And so thank you, and thank you to our listeners. Thanks for tuning in to Dangerous Ideas for Social Change.